No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspectives, this is Revenge of the Birds. Arizona Cardinals fans, thanks for listening. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. This is your host, Jess Root, as always, as we are on the verge of beginning the regular season. The Arizona Cardinals on Monday, September 8th, will open their season on Monday Night Football. And the big news that we've had so far is that over the weekend, the Cardinals, along with all the other NFL teams, had to trim their rosters down to 53 players. That meant cutting or placing. That meant 22 roster moves to get down from the 75 to 53. There were perhaps some surprises when it comes to the original cuts. Then there were some more moves as there were some waiver claims, and then the practice squad, and we're still not quite done. But what we're going to talk about tonight is I have Seth Cox on the line with me. Seth, how are you doing tonight?
Good, Jess. How are you?
Doing great. How's it feel to be just days away from football? I mean, on Thursday we get the real deal. Seattle and Green Bay, and then just a few days after that we get the Cardinals regular season open on Monday Night Football. How excited are you?
I'm very excited. You know, it's going to be enjoyable to finally stop the talking and I guess have all the reactions and overreactions to Game 1, good and bad. So we can either cancel the parade or write it down in stone when the parade route down in. Will they have the parade in Glendale or Phoenix? What are your thoughts on that?
Based on what we know about the Bidwells and Glendale, my guess it'll go right through down. I don't know. I would bet it would go through Phoenix, but there's some bad. I mean, it would make sense to do it by the stadium, but there's some bad blood right now between the Cardinals and Glendale. So, I don't know. So we're going to talk. Let's talk a little bit about the rosters, and again, this part of the show is brought to you. Revenge of the Birds Radio is brought to you by Audible.com, the internet's largest audio content provider, and you can audiobooks, podcasts. They've got it all. And right now, for Revenge of the Birds Radio's listeners, we have an offer that allows you to test out Audible.com and get yourself a free audiobook download. Test it out. audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds and get yourself that free month of service and a free audiobook download. I've just finished up I'm working on the second of the downloads that I've gotten. And actually listened to it on the trip back over the weekend, and the whole family actually made the car trip really nice. So go ahead and test out that service, Audible.com. Hit up the special offer that you listeners have through Revenge of the Birds Radio. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds, and get yourself your free audiobook download. And as we talk about the rosters, first off, were there any surprises for you, Seth, on the 22 moves? I mean, we saw Nate Potter. He wasn't cut. He wasn't placed on injury reserve. He was essentially placed on injury reserve and then let go on an injury settlement as he had a dislocated shoulder. Eddie Whitley broke his foot and ended up in injured reserve. Curtis Taylor, who looked like he might have a broken arm, turned out to be a bad bruise, a hematoma. And ended up getting let go among the other 19 cuts that there were. For you, were there any surprises when you looked at that first 40? Can't really call it the final 53-man roster, but it's kind of the first 53-man roster. Were there any surprises for you?
I don't know about surprises in terms of who was cut and who was not. I was surprised at how they built the roster. I kind of talked about it on Twitter a little bit today, but 53-man roster, and you have 17. Is that what it was? Or no, it's 18, right? 18 front seven guys on your defense. That seems like an awful lot.
It does, and we've talked about this on the show before, at least in terms of the defensive line. We kind of always knew, especially with the signing of Tommy Kelly, that and that actually came after our last show. The Tommy Kelly signing happened. It was rumored he signed, and he was amongst the final 53, or the first final 53. And we knew going into the whole roster cut that they were going to carry 7 defensive linemen, which is kind of curious. That's one more player than they had on the roster, defensive lineman-wise, a year ago. And they only played 5 a season ago. They played their starters, and they played Frosty Rucker, and they played Alameda Tamu. After that, I mean, Ronald Talley was on the roster, but by the end of the year, he was inactive almost every single game. It's going to be interesting how that plays out in terms of game day. Is Tommy Kelly going to be inactive? Now, Tiamu will probably be inactive the first day or game or two, I would imagine. But once that happens, do you sit Martin? Do you sit Kelly? Do you sit Rucker? Or do you sit Stinson? There's going to be something there. I wasn't surprised about that. Now, you'll probably get to the linebackers. The linebackers that came originally, there were 10 linebackers on the roster, and then after a waiver claim, 11 linebackers currently on the roster. Were you surprised that among that group that, well, one, Desmond Bishop made it in, Kenny Demmons made it in, undrafted rookie Glenn Carson made it in, and Marcus Bernard did not?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting grouping. I think the way they set up everything, it plays to the idea that they still don't know what they have, or are not comfortable with what they have at the linebacker position, and they're going to kind of go from there. And so their thought process is, hey, let's have as many linebackers on the roster as we can and find out who does the most for us in certain situations, and we'll kind of piece it together from there. I think you see that. In contrast, you only have 8 defensive backs, and that's a really low number. So, again, I think that's their thought process is we know how good we are in our secondary. We're comfortable with our cornerbacks and our safeties, and we know that we have Tyrann Mathieu, who's basically a cornerback and a safety. So, let's not worry about those guys, and let's see if we can find some linebackers who can give us the same type of, warm and fuzzy feeling. I don't know.
Well, when I looked initially at the defensive backs, I wasn't as surprised that they went small amount, especially because initially they had 6 receivers. Initially, you had the top 4 guys where you had Fitzgerald and Floyd and John Brown and Ted Ginn, and then Jerron Brown, and then the question was Walt Powell. He makes the original 53-man roster, which I thought would happen the entire time. I thought 6 receivers was the way they were going to go the entire time. And the way I saw it in terms of the defensive backs, where they only went with 8 DBs, is, if you think about it, barring injury, you don't even ever really get 4 cornerbacks deep anyway defensively. You are going to see, especially the Cardinals, how they have Mathieu playing the slot. It will be initially, I'm still interested as how they're going to work Mathieu in. Is he going to only play base safety? Is he only going to play nickel corner? How are they, or are they going to leave him at safety and even in nickel initially and continue to use Gerard Powers in the slot? That's kind of a dynamic that's interesting. Assuming he goes back into that nickel position, even their 4th cornerback in Justin Bethel, he's never going to see the field defensively because you've got your Patrick Peterson, Antonio Cromartie. They're not going to leave the field. As of right now, Gerard Powers is the nickel guy. If you have Mathieu, Gerard Powers essentially gets bumped off the field too, and then you have Justin Bethel. I understood why they went only with 4 corners, especially when that 5th and or maybe 6th guy were strictly special teamers, and you could get that from a receiver. So you have that with Jerron Brown and Walt Powell. What became interesting was the makeup of the roster after the waiver claim, and the fact that now Walt Powell was waived to make room for Thomas Kaiser, and then they weren't able to sneak him onto the practice squad because the Jets claimed him. They ended up with Britton Golden on the practice squad. They signed Kevin Cohn today on the practice squad. So you got kind of some of the same types of players available. But defensive backs, I wasn't surprised. One of the funniest comments I got on Twitter was it's referring to the quote, I believe, that Arians said when it came to quarterbacks. If you've got, or it's a commonly known quarterback, where if you've got two quarterbacks, then you really don't have any. And so what you're saying is, and I think the tweet went like this. What you're saying is, if you have 11 linebackers, you really don't have any. That's kind of the feeling you're getting, is that they're not confident in the linebackers they have in terms of pass rush, and that's why they went and picked up Kaiser. Who knows? Will he be able to do anything? Is he going to know the defense well enough? Are they going to stick him out there at the pass rush? And then if you look at it, on top of that, Kareem Martin, who has been playing off the edge on nickel and dime packages, and so you've essentially got a 12th linebacker in that among those four spots that you have to play.
Yeah, and that's what's going to be interesting, because it's going to be, you're in nickel or whatever you want to call it in terms of what the Cardinals do, 50+% of the time. So I guess you're going to try to find out who can rush the passer. The other question is, how many do they suit up on game day? You're only allowed to have 46 active players dress, so it's going to become more of a question of who do they suit up, and how does that kind of flow with what you're looking at. You're obviously going to have all 8 defensive backs suited up. So, do you carry a 6th defensive lineman like you talked about earlier, where they only had 5 really last year? Do you carry 8, 9 linebackers? I mean, you can't. I guess in theory you can, but it's usually not how you build how you have a game day roster to have 2 deep at every linebacker position. That's not something that you see a lot of. So I guess it'll just be interesting how they break it down on game day.
If you think about the 7 players that they end up having to deactivate for game day, one of them is going to be Logan Thomas. That you figure that with the 8 linemen that you're good, one of those will be inactive. So that'll either be Watford or Jonathan Cooper, at least initially. And my bet is, and I didn't read much about them, apparently Worrell Watford, they're giving some looks at right tackle for one way or another. This is from some cross-positional things for game day should anything come up. So that tells me that Jonathan Cooper's going to be inactive, at least initially. He's going to be, I guess, this year's Ryan Williams. You've got Cooper, you've got Thomas. You really, because of the special team situation, you have to keep all 5 of your receivers active. They might go with only 3 tight ends, but that seems unlikely with how they do things. So yeah, the inactive players are going to come out of the defensive front, and how exactly do you do that? So you're going to have one of your defensive linemen, maybe 2 of your defensive linemen, and 3 linebackers. Lorenzo Alexander's going to play because he is a special teams player. He's a special teams captain, as he was a season ago. He's going to be active. So what do you do there? I get the feeling that they're not done carving out the roster, and they're really just trying to play it by ear. There's some question as to how. John Abraham. There's definitely some question there. As to his effectiveness, his shape. There were some comments from some of our fellow friends on Twitter about how Abraham looks a little out of shape. I haven't noticed that. I know the one thing he did end up having to do, you show up 2-3 weeks late to camp. Guess what you get to do? You get to play in preseason game 4 extensively. The interesting for me out of that whole group is I thought Glenn Carson was player number 53. And not Walt Powell. And so when they claimed Kaiser, I was surprised they waived Powell as opposed to Carson, especially since he's already a linebacker. And they already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys that play inside linebacker. I'm kind of intrigued, in fact, at how they see Carson. And Did they think that he would more likely be claimed off waivers than Powell? And what their plans for him is, since the way it looks, there's no way he's going to get playing time.
Yeah, and that's what I don't understand. Are they expecting him to make a huge contribution on special teams? I don't know. It's a weird thing. And so far it's, all their moves have worked out. So I guess you can't really question anything right now. And that's that's the response you're going to get from fans is, well, they're 10-6 in what they're doing so far, so you can't really question it. And I agree with that. I mean, they've done a good job so far, so you just have to give them the benefit of the doubt and kind of follow along and see what happens next.
Well, interesting thing next. Let's talk about who's on the practice squad. Obviously, we get a little bit different look on the practice squad this year. It's been expanded to 10 players. Right now, the Cardinals have 9 of those 10 slots filled. And at least the players that they brought back of the guys they cut, I'm not surprised at all. I thought that... Let me go through the list. Go through the list real quick as to who is on the practice squad. I don't want to try and do that in memory and mess it up. So... on RevengeOfTheBirds.com, instantly enough, we have a Cardinals roster tracker where you can keep track of the cuts, the signings, the practice squad, and the rumors. Another interesting thing, the fact that James Harrison was actually... they wanted to sign James Harrison. They offered him a contract. Obviously, the numbers didn't work out. He retired. But the fact that James Harrison was still in the mix is also still kind of questionable. They brought back linebacker Jonathan Brown, another linebacker, mind you, another inside linebacker. So giving them, at least on the active roster, you've got Kevin Minter, you've got Larry Foote, Desmond Bishop, you have Kenny Demmons, Glenn Carson, Lorenzo Alexander, who's basically moved back to inside linebacker, and Jonathan Brown. That's 7 players for 2 positions. They brought back Britton Golden, they brought back tight end Andre Hardy, cornerback Jimmy Legree, tackle Kevin Palmer. They brought back Anthony Steen. That's a positive seen by a lot of people. Today was announced. It actually happened. Yes, it's happened. I'm sorry. On Sunday it happened that Christian Tupou was signed to the practice squad. It was announced, and maybe that was Monday. And then on Tuesday it was announced that Kevin Cohn and Dominique Williams were added to the practice squad. Interesting thing about that, none of the guys that the Cardinals brought back among their cuts surprised me. I thought that their first pick would have been Bruce Gaston. Unfortunately, he ended up getting claimed by the Patriots. He was an intriguing talent, to say the least. One of those guys that you could see filling, say, a season from now. Alameda Te'ama moves into the starting job, and Dan Williams is allowed to go into free agency and sign a contract somewhere else, and then you bring in Gaston behind Te'amu, and you kind of don't miss a beat in terms of that. So Tupou, I think, was their second choice. The guys that kind of intrigue me, I don't know anything about Kevin Cohn, but Dominique Williams in terms of running back instead of Zach Bowman, very surprised. He's a shorter, what is he, 5'8", 5'9", 205, with not burner speed, 4.6 speed. Very surprising. I mean, they saw him in Minnesota. He ran a couple of times. He caught a pass for 11 yards. I'm really surprised at what the Cardinals might see in a young Williams. Do you know anything about him?
I don't actually. So it's tough for me to speak on what he did. It's another one of those interesting things. You look at what he did in terms of what Bowman, what he did in terms of, what they asked him to do. And I thought, he did as much, he probably did more than we've seen other running backs do in terms of, carrying the load in bad situations. And that's kind of what he had here. And I don't think, again, Williams, he's another smaller type of guy, 5'9", like you said, 205. what he does well, and what I've read about him after they signed him to the practice squad, is he's good in pass pro. We know how much that means to Bruce Arians. So I think you're seeing that manifest itself in how he's building his playing roster. He wants guys that are getting reps to do what the starters are going to do, just in case that they're called on at any time.
And he does fit the profile. He was he went to Wagner College, a smaller school. He wildly productive. Again, that's a lower conference, the Northeast Conference. He rushed over 100 yards in 26 of his 43 games, over 5,000 all-purpose yards. But it also meets the profile. I believe he was a team captain 3 of the 4 years. I seem to remember when I was reading up on him on Sunday, because there was the rumor was out there on Sunday, and it didn't come to it ended up happening. But it was an interesting conversation that happened on Twitter when a reporter from Atlantic City reported he was coming to the Cardinals, and it wasn't actually a fact yet. But I looked it up, and he fits that young player profile. He was a leader in college. He was extremely productive. So he kind of fits in the locker room as well, because he looks like he's going to be a guy that just kind of fits there. He's not going to cause any problems, and can be a sort of future leader, mind you, if he does fill a greater role.
Yeah, and that's that'll be the interesting thing. And I think Bowman not getting picked up kind of speaks to what the NFL thinks of him, I guess. So it's kind of like the Ryan Williams thing. The Cardinals didn't play him, and then he went to Dallas and had a chance to make a roster and then got cut. So it's like you can't really question what the Cardinals did, because, well, I guess you can because it's Dallas, but I mean, another NFL team, and he still hasn't been picked up. Or that's right, he didn't get picked up off of waivers, so he's on Dallas's practice squad. So, I mean, do you really want to question anything there? I don't think so. So it's the same type of thing, I think the Walt Powell thing may end up being more of okay, let's monitor this and see what happens type of thing than any of the other cuts so far.
And interestingly enough, I posted an article on Tuesday on just that, about the whole Walt Powell thing, and it was a conversation that we had when we were texting the other day, and it was about the Ted Ginn contract. Obviously, we understand why Ted Ginn is on the team. There is value to what he does. However, there is little upside to what he provides. He's a veteran. He has been dynamic in the return game. He was a much improved receiver a season ago. He definitely has elite speed. And when they signed him, they couldn't have known who they were going to get in the draft. However, when you end up with John Brown wowing everyone, Walt Powell, who showed that he definitely has upside, and then you end up have Jerron Brown as well, they were in a situation where they had to let a young guy go, in this case Powell, and they're stuck with a guy in Ginn whose contract, I mean, they couldn't really cut him with more than $3 million in dead money. And what you said to me, his dead money is more than all three of those young receivers by far. All three, probably twice of what those three young receivers' salary is total. And so I get why they kept him, especially since you want to have a good mix of veteran players. As he's been around the league a long time. And so, yeah, I get why they did it, but we'll see in a couple of years if Powell develops into anything more than just, even if he's an elite special teamer, if the Cardinals will regret having stuck with Ginn and not stuck with Powell and letting one of their linebackers go.
Yeah, and I mean, he went to a team that he's going to have a chance to make an impact on, because you look at the Jets and you look at their kind of 53-man, he probably won't play this week. I mean, I would be shocked if he played this week, but going forward, he's going to, he's got to beat out guys that aren't really great receivers. I mean, they have a nice 1-2 tandem with Eric Decker and Jeremy Curley, who's a nice kind of similar receiver to Walt Powell, but then David Nelson and Greg Salas are their 3 and 4, and I wouldn't be shocked if Powell was able to get over those guys quick and be improve, maybe be a 4 this year, maybe even a 3, who knows, and turn some heads a little bit. And I think when you have an ability like Powell has, that I think he showcased a little bit in the preseason, opportunity is going to breed success, and if he gets that opportunity, I think people will be impressed with him. But in the long run, and I've said this a million times in a million different venues, he is just a wide receiver. So those guys are replaceable, 99% of the time.
Yes, especially the back of the roster guys. They are. You see undrafted guys make rosters every single year. The Cardinals, goodness, have seen probably a dozen of them over years between, last year Jerron Brown, LaRon Byrd, Steven Williams, Lance Long. And the list is almost every single year there is an undrafted receiver that makes an impact in camp that ends up doesn't being much at all. That's how we go over that. But are there any other surprises, any other, not necessarily surprises, or maybe regrets of the moves that you saw the Cardinals make thus far?
No, because of the Potter injury. That's something that you and I have talked about on previous podcasts. He's just so ill-fittingly built to be an offensive lineman in the NFL. Was it the same shoulder he had problems with before the draft? I didn't really follow up too much.
I didn't even look at that because I thought that was kind of like the nail in the coffin for Potter. And so we end up with Bradley Sowell again. I mean, it's Bradley Sowell time. Just when we thought he was dead in the water. I mean, we thought it was going to happen. We thought that Arians was down enough on Sowell that we might see the end of it. But no, they cut Starks. Potter gets hurt, so they injury settlement him, and we're left with Bradley Sowell again as a swing tackle. So welcome back, Bradley.
Yeah, and I think what happens here is, I don't know. I'm really intrigued / hesitant to see Earl Watford play tackle, and so that's my question. I mean, you dress Sal, but for the time being until Watford's maybe ready to play tackle, and then God forbid anything happens to Beldier, are you going to move Massey over to left tackle?
That would be
have Sal at right tackle or left tackle, and Watford's going to be kind of your right tackle / backup guard. I don't know. It's a weird situation for me.
Well, there's one thing I know about Bobby Massey. Bobby Massey hasn't played he never played the left side. I mean, dating back to high school, he was a right tackle. Even back then. So high school is a right tackle, college is a right tackle. He's never played the left side, so it's not really. It would have to be an absolute emergency, and definitely to get you through a game. You'd think, okay, Bradley Sowell, you did it last year. You weren't great, but nobody died back there. I mean, it wasn't Kevin Cobb like, it wasn't Deontay Batiste back there. So you let him hold the ground there. I didn't even think about that. I should have, but the fact that they're working Earl Watford at right tackle is just more. It's just more evidence of a lack of confidence in Sowell that they have back there at their swing tackle, and I'm sure that will be one of the moves that they are scouring or they're developing. Or if they see more from Kevin Palmer in the practice squad, you might see him elevating. You might see Sowell kissed goodbye at some point.
Yeah, I think just if we don't see Sal, everybody will be happy. I think it's when and if you have to see Sal, then all of a sudden everybody's going to start wondering some things. Obviously, it wasn't bad that they cut Potter because they couldn't do anything with Potter if he's injured. And like I said, his build and his body was just not conducive to being an NFL player. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that they cut him. It's unfortunate.
Well, and it's interesting. We haven't really talked about it as the makeup of the offensive line. It's very guard heavy. Now, in part, that's simply because Ted Larson ended up being the starter left guard, but you have a super guard-heavy line. So you've got your tackles in Valdir, you've got Massey, and then Sal who can play. And Matt, and to his credit, Sal can play. I believe the only position that he hasn't played is center, because he's played guard before. He's played both tackle positions. So he just is not a center. But now you have Larson, who's playing guard, and you have Faneca, who's a guard. And there's a guy you could, in an absolute emergency, you could throw Faneca out of tackle because he used to be a tackle. Then you've got Watford a guard, and you've got Jonathan Cooper a guard. And your backup center is playing left guard on the starting line. So lots of guards, even though right guard they are super confident in, apparently. It's left guard that... So they basically have three guys for one position, and Larson turns out to be the guy, which turned out to be, at least for now, not a dumb signing by any means. It was a very wise signing.
Yeah, and I think the way you kind of look at it is Larson is your starting left guard / backup center and right guard, and Cooper's like your starting left guard or backup left guard until he's able to start. What you look at in terms of the building of this line, at least for me, is you look at it, where does Earl Watford fit in? Because I think, again, God forbid anything happen to Paul Faneca, I think Larson's going to move over there, and then they'll put Cooper in at left guard. So basically anything happens to center or left guard, center, or right guard, Cooper's going to go to left guard, and then Larson's the first man up to replace the center or right guard. And then, so you're keeping Watford as like a third guard, or is he going to play at right guard? I don't know. I guess that's where I'm at in that is I can't figure out the kind of depth chart, so to speak, for what the Cardinals have, unless they're just going to have a straight left guard is, backup is Cooper, right guard backup is Watford, and Larson will slide to center if need be.
That could be. That could be. But I think at the end of the day, the reason why Watford's still on the roster is because they still want to give him 1 year more before they cut him loose, per se. And that way next year, ideally Larson goes back to his backup role, and then you can let Watford and Cooper kind of battle out on one side. Or rather, Cooper's healthy sometime this year and he looks great, and so he's locked up the left guard. And that leaves you with Earl Watford and ideally Anthony Steen and Ted Larson to battle out for that right guard position, which would really be an interesting combination there. And maybe Steen moves over to center. There, either that or we talked about that as well. So I think more than anything, Watford showed enough promise that they want to keep him around at least for another season before they cut ties completely with him.
Yeah, it's just the whole building of the team is so different than what you're normally used to, because it seems like you have a lot of guys that you don't want to see in terms of getting time, but then you have a lot of depth in the interior of the offensive line where you're like, oh, if anything happens to Larson or Lyle Sendeline or Paul Faneca, we're fine. But then anything happens to Bobby Massey or Jared Valdir, it's gonna be a mad dash to the waiver wire to see what's available. It's just so different than what you're used to.
Yeah, it's gonna kind of be 2012 all over again. So we can't. The Cardinals really can't afford to lose Massey or Valdir, especially Valdir, because you lose him. It is on a much higher scale, I think, than what you saw in 2012 when Levi Brown went down. Obviously, Levi Brown was not the caliber tackle that Valdir is, but Brown's loss completely, utterly destroyed any hope of any sort of effectiveness on that line, and it's what essentially cost Kevin Cobb his career.
That's yeah. I think that's what you're aiming not to see at this point.
Let's not talk about that. That's enough doomsday. Let's talk about other stuff. Let's move. So I think we're kind of set on the roster. Let's go into our season preview. Let's talk season preview as the regular season starts on Monday, September 8th. They will be hosting the San Diego Chargers on Monday Night Football. It's going to be a late night. Yes, that's going to be a really late night because normally only in week 1 do you get a game that starts that late on the West Coast, and so it's going to go well into the night. Anyone who's watching or listening on the East Coast is going to be up into the wee hours of the morning. But it's going to be a long halftime too, I'm sure, because they're going to be honoring Kurt Warner, so it'll be a game to watch. And I think that that is going to be one fired up stadium. It's going to be a very fired up team, and I really like what the outlook is for that game in particular, especially coming off the season in which they missed the playoffs. But let's talk about the picture of 2014, and let's talk about what are we going to see? What do you expect the Cardinals to do? Your predictions for them, where they're going to get their wins, perhaps some of the numbers that we're going to see, some individuals, and then the outlook for the NFC West. Now, I'll go ahead and start off and give my predictions for the Cardinals, and I'll admit I had to, when I did my first projections, it came out 8-8. And I looked at it and I said, this team, that's a worst case scenario for me is I have their win range between 8 and 12 wins. And to me, 8 wins is kind of the bottom of that. And what I did, this is how I'm going to look at it, I can't expect anything more than a split in the NFC West. 4-2, I think it will require a 4-2. If they don't get 4-2, they will not win the division. I don't think they'll win the division this year. It's certainly possible, but I can't make that prediction based on the teams ahead of them. San Francisco, yes, definitely have questions, but they improved by all means. They have more offensive weapons, and they've got another year of Colin Kaepernick, who people were really down on him, but you look at the body of work he had last year, that was really kind of an impressive year overall, even though there was a lull in there. Seattle is still the Super Bowl champions. And yes, they lost some depth, but they still have the talent overall that they had. So I cannot see them taking a huge step back, barring injury in both cases. And in San Francisco, there's just some question marks on the defensive side. But I can't see the Cardinals realistically on a preseason prediction going better than 3-3 in the division. And so I'm not going to pick where they get the wins that way. I think one of the teams they'll sweep, and I think one of the teams they'll get swept. I don't know which way that'll go. I think the easiest way to say is that the Cardinals split against the 49ers this year. They get swept by Seattle, and then they sweep the Rams. But I think they get just 3 wins somewhere. And then I go down the rest of those 10 games, and I try to be not too optimistic and not too pessimistic. Because the one thing we always know is that football seasons don't go exactly as they're expected to be. And so I look at the schedule, I see the Chargers as a win. They're going to open up at home. Initially, I said, the Giants, I see that out there on the East Coast, I saw that as a loss. So I initially went through and ended up going 5-5 the rest of the way. I had the Chargers with a win, the Giants with a loss, losing to the Broncos, beating the Skins, beating the Raiders, losing at home to the Eagles. I actually had them originally losing to the Cowboys on the road. Ooh, I know. Beating the Lions at home, losing to the Falcons on the road, and defeating the Chiefs here at home. Which essentially what I have for them in the NFC East, I had them originally actually going 1-3. That's questionable. And then I looked at it, that can't be right. Can't really go against that division. I had them going 3-1 against the AFC West, and then I had them splitting their other NFC games, beating the Lions and losing. So 8-8 seems a little pessimistic, and so I turned 2 of those losses. I turned the Giants' loss into a win and a Cowboys' loss into the win, and I see the Cardinals, of their 10 games that are left, going 4-1 at home, going 4-1 at home, with losing to the Eagles. As much as you'd like the Cardinals to avenge that game, I think that they're going to be a talented enough team that's going to be a tough one, and I don't think the Cardinals are going to win every single game at home. I just don't think that's going to happen. So I have to pick a loss somewhere. So I'm going to have them going 3-1 against the NFC East. I'm going to have them going 3-1 against the AFC West, and I'm going to have them splitting their games. I have them beating the Lions at home and losing to the Falcons on the road, just simply because I think that offense will be much improved. The defense is still questioned. I think that'll be a shootout win, unlike the terrible game that it was in 2012. So in the end, I have them going 10-6, but I still see that as very, very possibly missing the playoffs and being in a third-place finish again.
You know, and I look at like how you do that, and you went from 8-8 to 10-6, and I look at it kind of similarly. So like if I had them at 10 wins like you do, I could see them going anywhere from like 6-10 to 14-2. Like I think in the NFL with health and a lot of different things, there's a 4-game swing you can see in the NFL. So you know, you predict them at 10-6. I mean, theoretically, you're talking about 4 games where they could miss out and lose, you know, 4 games and be 6-10. But there's 4 games that they could find a way to win that you weren't expecting to, and they end up at 14-2. Now, I don't think anybody thinks they're going to go 6-10, or I don't think anybody thinks they're going to go 14-2 either. But I just, that's how I kind of think about everything. So when I went through everything this year, I came down to a really sturdy 9-7, and I'm actually really comfortable with 9-7. I know, holy cow, they're going to lose one more game than they did last year. I'm the most negative person in the world, I know. But
you're a hater, Seth. You're a hater.
I know. So, but 9-7, I look at the roster and the way the schedule falls. I am very nervous about that first game because I think and what I talked about on the Chargers podcast tonight, I think the Chargers' strengths really can expose the Cardinals' weaknesses. And if the Cardinals can't get a pass rush going, I don't know if there's really that many quarterbacks better in the NFL than Phillip Rivers, and that's what they can look at doing in game one. But I did pick the Cardinals to win game one. I think I told them 35-32 or 35-31. So a really high scoring affair because I don't see the Chargers stopping the Cardinals at all personally. So the next week, again, kind of a coin flip. You look at the Giants, and we really have no idea what they're going to do. They've been terrible, and the starting offense has, at least, in the preseason. So you look at it and you go, well, the Cardinals should have no problem with that. Well, it's the Cardinals, one of only 2 early games for the Cardinals all season. One of only 2 East Coast games, and it's the second week of the season. And you kind of look at that and go, okay, what are we going to see here? What Cardinals team comes out? So San Francisco, again, another one of those coin flips where you just kind of look at it and you go, I think the Cardinals have the ability to beat the 49ers, especially at home. But they haven't done it in, 8 games?
Yeah, they've lost 9 out of the last 10 games they played against San Francisco, and that one was in 2011 at the end of the year with John Skelton.
That's right. So, I mean, it's just not it's an ugly proposition, but I do think that the Cardinals can win that game. Denver, I think now that Wes Welker's suspended, you're kind of catching Denver at a good time. It's their last week without Welker. But let's not downgrade what Emmanuel Sanders or Cody Latimer, the rookie, can do. I mean, if we're going to give John Brown a bunch of credit, then I think we need to do similarly for Cody Latimer.
And it's Peyton Manning, for crying out loud.
Yeah, exactly.
At home.
Yeah, so
during the regular season, mind you. So it's just not the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly.
Peyton Manning annihilates everybody in the regular season.
Yeah, and I think that there's going to be an extra focus Peyton Manning this year. I think he's embarrassed and hurt of what happened last year in the Super Bowl. So, but we'll see what happens. Washington, Oakland, I'd be disappointed if that wasn't a 2-0 stretch right there. I think that's the best way to put it. Disappointment. And I think that Philadelphia, Dallas, St. Louis, Detroit foursome right there is really going to kind of make or break their season. And not because those are good teams or bad teams, but I think because right after that, you go on to Seattle, at Seattle, at Atlanta, home versus KC, at St. Louis. Then you get Seattle at home and at San Francisco. And those last 6 games are just they're just so heavy on the season. Where if you can find a way to go 3-1 in that Philly, Dallas, St. Louis at home, and Detroit at home foursome, or 4-0 even, you're really setting yourself up to where, okay, you can lose a game at Seattle. Maybe you lose a game at Atlanta, and then you're able to pick a road win up against St. Louis and win your home games against Kansas City and Seattle, and you set yourself up at 9-6 or 10-5 going into San Francisco. And I think that's where you have to make your money, is if you find a way to start your season at, I don't know, I guess, what is that? The first 6 games, 4-2 or 3-3, and then you're 7-3 heading into that, 7-3 or 6-4 heading into that last 6 games of the season. Then you've given yourself a chance to split on what are probably the 6, a really tough final stretch of the season, final 6 games that are, even if you don't think Atlanta's going to be good, it's still an away game in Atlanta. Kansas City, Andy Reid, that's, they're always going to be a tough team offensively to cover. And then you end the game, you end the season with St. Louis, Seattle, and San Francisco. I think going into that, if you're not, at 6 wins already, you're gonna have a hard time getting to that 9 or 10 wins like you and I are talking about. But I think if you get there at 6-4, or especially like a 7-3, you should expect 10 wins at minimum there. And that's what it's going to come down to. I broke the season down how I did it into 3 sections, where the first 6 games you really want to come out of there at least 3-3, but more likely 4-2. Those next 4 games you want to find a way to go at minimum 3-1, and then, like I said, that last 6 games of the season you want to set yourself up to where 3-3 gets you into the playoffs, and I think that's more important than anything else.
Okay, let's try to go game by game just a little bit. I have a prediction. I have a prediction 10-6, and you have a solid 9-7. So week 1, you agree, probably a win.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of us would be disappointed if they came out and laid their egg.
Week 1,
their national game egg that they have before.
Yeah, so week 1 we say win. Week 2, did you have a win projected there?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a win in week 2.
I'm going to predict I don't like to pick the division games, but I'm going to say for the sake of the division, I say week 3 the Cardinals win. What do you say for that one?
I agree.
I think they're not going to beat or lose anyone in the bye. Week 5 Broncos. No, I think that's an easy loss.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
Redskins win, and you had the same thing.
Yes.
Raiders win.
Yeah, so we both got them starting 5-1. That's interesting.
Now the Eagles, I have a loss.
Yeah, and I think
even though it's at home, but I have that as a loss.
I think if you have them at 5-1, I think that's fair. I think a loss there it makes sense.
I have the Cowboys as a win.
And I'm going to go a loss there because it's their other early game.
Okay.
Even though it's not a huge East Coast game, it's still their other early game out of the time zone.
I have the Rams as a win.
Rams and Lions for me as wins.
Okay, I've got a win there. And the Lions at Seahawks, nope, that's a loss.
Yeah, I mean, I know everybody's going to point to last year, but I think more than anything, the Cardinals win in Seattle awoke the beast that was.
That's not going to be an ugly. That's going to be an ugly game.
Yeah, that awoke the beast that was Seattle, and we'll see if that gets flexed. Let's put it this way: let's hope it gets flexed or has the opportunity to get flexed there.
And Atlanta, I have a loss.
Let's see. I got to do math in my head now. I don't know what I have. Math. You know what? Yeah, because I think I have them. So yeah, I'll go loss in Atlanta as well.
KC, I have them beating at home.
Yes.
St. Louis on the road, a win.
I think I have them. Yep, a win as well.
Okay, so basically, the one game difference we have is you have them losing to the Cowboys. I have them beating the Cowboys at this point in the final 2 games of the year. Their 2 toughest games are going to be. I have them at 10-4. You have them at 9-5. I have them losing at home. I think the Seahawks will sweep them this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think if you could maybe flip one game, you could. For me, it would be Dallas and Seattle, maybe, and you have them at.
I have them at 10-5. You're at 9-6, and then
San Francisco. I guess I have to see it before I can believe it.
Well, and I'm predicting. This is kind of how I did it last year. I saw them going 9-7. My prediction going into the season, I had them at 9-5, losing their final 2 games, bumping them out of the playoffs, finishing 9-7. It didn't quite end up that way, but the loss did. They ended up 10-6 with the loss at San Francisco against San Francisco, bumping out of the playoffs. I have them this year heading into the final 2 at 10-4, and they lose their last 2 games, bumping them out of the playoffs again.
Wow, you're more negative than I am tonight. That's pretty good.
Well, I can see them surpassing the 49ers, but I can't make an honest prediction to say I'm confident enough in this Cardinals team to say they are going to leapfrog. I see them, if I had to make a prediction, I have them in 3rd place still, and then maybe sneaking into the wild card, and that's a maybe.
Yeah, and I think they're going to be in contention for a wild card, and I actually think they're going to make a wild card this year, barring injury, obviously, or anything like that. I think 9-7 is going to be good enough this year. I think we're going to have a slight dip in the NFC South, and I think that's going to and I think the NFC East is still a mess.
I agree with that. The thing is that last year, where the NFC South was so strong, and so you had Carolina and New Orleans, I think New Orleans is definitely the class of that division. What do we get from Atlanta? And especially if the Cardinals lose at Atlanta, then they're going to have to finish a solid game better than Atlanta to be able to make the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think Atlanta's going to be right around 7 to 9 wins, so that could definitely be a factor. But I think that the Cardinals, as it ends, I think they could be looking at the playoffs, and I think we're going to get 3 teams from the NFC West this year, and it's going to be a lot of fun because I think they're all 3 going to get to the second round, and they're going to really show that this division is the best division in football still. So
you are predicting then that the NFC West, they won't have the top seed, but they'll have the 2, 3, and 4 then.
Yeah, I think New Orleans goes in with the top seed this year.
Okay, that makes sense.
Maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid on New Orleans a little too much.
But it makes sense because the division's gotten. You have to think it's going to be hard for the NFC West to come with the number 1 seed simply because of how good the NFC West is. So yeah, I can see that. So you have them as 9-7 making the playoffs. I have them at 10-6 not making the playoffs. So I'm.
Yeah. So who are you going to call a hater now, Cardinals fans? Come on.
So now let's look at some individual performances, some projections as we close out the year. Before we close out the show, and we're going to have another show this week. I will be speaking with John Gennaro of Bolts from the Blue, our SB Nation sister site for the Chargers, and I will be getting together with him later this week, and we'll have that via download available. Again, Cardinals fans, Revenge of the Birds Radio, we are doing it a little differently. Rather than broadcasting the show live, I know only a handful of people are listening to it live, and we're hoping that with audio quality will be improved as we direct host it and then upload the show. It's like a real podcast rather than a radio show. So I hope you're listening to the show and enjoying it. But let's talk about projections in terms of the individuals. Carson Palmer, I have him this year going for, at a 10-6 year, I have him throwing for 4,800 yards, 32 touchdowns, and then 17 interceptions. With the caveat being, a game here, a game there, it could easily be 21 interceptions and 4,600 yards, but still about 30 touchdowns. What do you see from Carson this year?
Yeah, I think he's going to be right around 4,600 yards, and I think he's going to be right at that 30 touchdown mark, 28 to 30, and I think he's going to still be at about 18 to 20 interceptions on the season.
That's very Palmer. I mean, he's going to throw interceptions. He's not going to have that year where he throws 10 or 9 to go with 30 touchdowns. That's just not Carson Palmer. It's never been Carson Palmer, and we'll just have to expect that. It's just a matter of, does he connect on more of those throws for touchdowns rather than get 24 and 22, it's more 30 and 20.
Yeah, and I think it's timing as well. When does he throw those interceptions? Is it more the Seattle game where it's early and they can overcome it, or is it going to be more late where it's a kind of a dagger type thing? All interceptions are bad, but they're not all equally bad.
Exactly. And a lot of his interceptions came early, and he tended to bounce back. Receivers, I have Michael Floyd going for about 1,300 yards. I don't know. I'd say probably 85 catches, 1,300 yards. With Fitz, probably with right around the same amount of catches with 1,000 yards. Is that a fair projection from those two? With Fitz kind of just skimming past the 1,000-yard mark this year.
So here's what I'm going to say, and I don't know, maybe I'm crazy because I can be at times. I think Fitzgerald ends up with basically the same numbers he had last year.
So 950?
Yeah, right around that. But I think he's going to have more catches than Floyd again. And I think some of Floyd's numbers are going to get transferred to John Brown.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's necessarily going to be like a drop in terms of production, but I don't think he's going to put up the numbers that everybody's expecting him to put up. Only because, and not because he's bad or anything of that nature. I just think there's so many alternatives, and I do think that, and we'll get to him shortly, Andre Ellington's going to put up some big numbers. So I think right around 1,000 to 1,100 yards again for Floyd, and so I don't see him getting extra numbers. My interest in Floyd this year is going to be how many touchdowns does he score. I think you would like
double
to
digits.
See. Yeah, I think if you're in the 8 to 12 range, you're happy. If you're in that 5, I think anything below 8, barring again injury, is going to be slightly disappointing.
So, John Brown, I have him projected. It's not going to have a T.Y. Hilton year. He's not going to be a 1,000-yard guy. I think in the end it's going to be about 600 yards. And I think John Carlson will be not far behind it, about 500 yards. I don't know about the catches. Yards are a little bit easier for me to predict than catches, because especially with the number of weapons that they have. But do you see John Brown going over or under 600?
I think it's going to be right around 650, 700.
What about Carlson at 500?
I think he's going to be right between that 400 and 500 range. The biggest thing for Carlson is he's got to stay healthy.
Yeah.
He's got to find a way to stay on the field. Because I don't think any of us want to see Rob Hausler be the number one tight end.
Breakout player!
Yeah, I think we've been calling for it for 3 years. I think, and you know what will happen is he'll break out this year because nobody's calling for it.
Exactly, and it'll be the year because Carlson will go down with a concussion, and then Hauser busts out for 700. No, I don't expect that. Andre Ellington, there were some are very easily projecting 1,500 combined yards. I'm going to go on the lighter side because I think he's going to get dinged up a little bit just because we've seen he seemed to, minor injuries. It's not going to really hamper him too bad, but I think he'll only have, which will still be a good year, 1,300 combined yards. It's not going to be the magical 1,600. I think it's going to be right about 1,300 combined yards.
Yeah, I think you're going to be about 1,400. I think you'll be disappointed if it's not, 1,400. That's how I feel. I think he's going to have a good season, and he's going to kind of break out a little bit, and everybody's going to enjoy watching him play.
All right, so let's look at it defensively. I don't know what to. I don't know. I think John Abraham, I don't think he's going to have an 11-sack year like he had a year ago. I think he's going to ray around 7 or 8 sacks. Calais Campbell with about the same production. We might get a little more, like 4 or 5 sacks from Frosty Rucker. Interception-wise, that's harder to pick out. Hopefully we see more than 3 interceptions by Peterson. We can see more like 5 or 6 and another 4 or 5 from Cromartie. But I think it's going to be. I think the defense isn't going to be the headliner this year. I think the offense will headline, and the defense will be good to very good. I don't think it will be elite like it was a season ago.
I think the running defense is still going to be elite, because I think that's the way they built this defense, because they know they're in the NFC West, so they have to be elite. But I do worry about the pass defense and the ability to rush the passer. So I think that's where it's gonna be. Can they rush the passer? Can they get after the quarterback? And can they make convert those pressures, which has become kind of the hot word of importance in terms of pressures are more important than sacks, but you know what? Pressures still allow a quarterback to get the ball out, whereas sacks don't. So
right. And so you're talking like disruptions, but even good quarterbacks, even on a disrupt throw, you still see them completing passes.
Well, and I looked at it real quick. I looked at Phillip Rivers, and he still had like an absurd 98% quarterback rating under pressure. So again, like you said, disruptions are beautiful, but in the end, they don't stop the quarterback from throwing a pass, whereas obviously sacks do. So that's what you have to figure out is how can you get to the quarterback and get him sacked over just getting to the quarterback.
And aside from the unknown quantity when it comes to the tight end position, I think this defense will be more susceptible to the short passing game than anything else. That short underneath game, because of the kind of the personnel they have. I think they'll be good on the outside, but they will be susceptible to just dink and dunking, having them dinked and dunked down the field. It will tend to be, and then hopefully avoiding those big plays. I think that's how that will end up being in the passing game.
Yeah, and that's, again, that's what worries me about the first game of the season, because I think that's what San Diego does so well is they get those short and intermediate game, and they get it going, and they're able to, make plays and kind of sustain drives as opposed to being a big play offense. So, if that is a concern, and I think you're right, I think the linebacker coverage, I think that's something that's heavily underplayed is how good both Carlos and Darryl were in coverage last year, and they were on the field. Remember, they were on the field every snap. It wasn't like they were taken off in passing downs; they were still on the field. Then the other question is, when the Cardinals blitz, can they get pressure from their linebackers like they did with Carlos and Darryl? And that's where I think that's where in the passing game you're going to miss those guys more so than in the running game. That's why I don't think, you hate to say there's not going to be any drop-off when you're talking about 3 key components missing.
It's really impossible to say that's not.
Yeah, but but in the run game, just how good the scheme is and how good those guys are, Foot and Minter are attacking downhill. Heck, put Bishop in there. Again, they may not make plays in the backfield, but maybe they're making plays 1 or 2 yard gains instead of
that's fair.
minus 1 or 2. So
if you had to pick a player that would be a surprise performer this season, who would you think on either side of the ball? Who would be your surprise player to produce this year?
I think for me, it's going to be that's tough because I think everybody's so high on everybody right now that it's so.
We love the Cardinals and everything they're doing.
Yeah, I think what you're gonna like this year is Tony Jefferson and what he does, and I think he's gonna make a name for himself in the defensive backfield, and I think he's going to be in on a lot of plays, and he's going to be near the ball a lot, and a lot of NFL teams are going to look funny for not having drafted him in the 5th, 6th, or 7th round and letting the Cardinals snap him up on the undrafted free agent wire.
And I'm not going to try and overproject anyone on the offensive side of the ball, so I'll go defense, and I think the guy that will, and maybe it's not so much a surprise, but simply because of his age, I think Larry Foote is going to have a very, very productive year. He's got the leadership qualities. I just saw a tweet that came across as the team voted for captains. Larry Foote, who has been here just a few months, got 12 votes for captain on the defensive side of the ball, and Calais Campbell to be the captain. But that's respect. That's respect, and I think he will have a much better season than people thought he would have. I mean, even in 2012, he had a very productive season with Detroit. I think we see a very good Larry Foote this year. Tell us give us a pick for someone who might be this year's disappointment on either side of the ball.
I'm going to go... who should I go with? I'm going to go Kevin Minter, and only because I think he's going to continue to have injury plagueness. I don't know how to describe it, but I think he's going to continue to be plagued by injuries, and that's going to impact what he does. And so I think it's going to be a disappointment, kind of in the same vein as Jonathan Cooper. It's not necessarily the fact that you're disappointed in his ability. It's the fact that you're not getting to see what he does as much as you'd like to.
And I like the Mitter pick. I'm not even going to go with Jonathan Cooper. I think it's going to be the easy, disappointing pick. I think he might be this year's Ryan Williams, unfortunately, and that's a shame. But I'm going to go with who did I say? Ted Ginn. And it's not going to be. I don't think it's not going to be because of the receiving game. I think his return game will be. It'll be better than Patrick Peterson and Javier Arenas. Mind you that, because it doesn't take much. Patrick was terrible last year. Javier Arenas had terrible decision-making. But when the Cardinals signed again, a lot of people were expecting an elite returner, and he hasn't been really an elite returner for a little bit, for a couple of years. So I think he's going to be the disappointment of the year in terms of that, especially looking at what he's being paid. He's not going to be fantastic at offense, and I don't think he's going to be a difference maker in the return game.
Yeah, and I think that's what my biggest disappointment is in terms of like heading all the way back to the beginning of the conversation of the cut of Walt Powell is. I don't think Ginn's going to be a difference maker enough to justify the fact that they cut him. So I think I'm kind of with you on that.
All right. Well, that about wraps it up, Seth. We've talked Arizona Cardinals, we talked rosters, we talked records, we talked projections. Seth, the negative one, has the Cardinals going to the playoffs this year with a 9-7 season. I, on the other hand, the super optimistic, typically, of the Cardinals fans, am projecting a 10-6 campaign, but no playoffs for the Arizona Cardinals. Seth, anything else you'd like to say to the audience?
No, just appreciate you guys listening. I look forward to the weekly talk, and hopefully Jess and I are both wrong, and we can talk about the Cardinals
Super
winning.
Bowl!
Yeah, not just that, winning 12 or 13 games, so it's more of an enjoyable season.
All right, thanks everyone for listening. That's Seth. I'm Jess. We'll talk to you. Well, the two of us will be back on in a week, and I will have John Gennaro from Bolts of the Blue on in a couple of days. Thanks for listening.
Have a good night, everybody.
You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/revengeofthebirds.